We're making stuff look old today, and no, I'm not talking about Kenneth. Let's talk weathering.
That the entirety of the cosmos is accessible to each and every individual's mind, connecting to the great mind, the great spirit.
Welcome back to the studio, collectors. This is Beginner Explains Weathering, where I'll go over quick and easy methods of weathering your models. For this video, we'll be using Kill Team Terrain as our example pieces. To start off, I'm going to set up a baseline for how all of these are going to look before the weathering. Weathering usually looks best on textured surfaces. In this case, we'll first be airbrushing all of these models brown, and then hand painting the smaller decals so that it's not so dull looking. Now, let's talk weathering. As usual, this video has been divided into useful chapters, so you can skip on ahead to find what you're looking for. So the chapters for this video are dry brushing, sponging, pigments, and finally washes. So let's get into the first method of weathering, dry brushing. Dry brushing is basically making stabbing motions with a giant bristle brush onto your large terrains. Because there's no water used during the process, it gives off the appearance of something being dusty and dry. We're going to be using this on the metallic pipes and beams of the model. So without further ado, let's get to it.
So as you can see, I'm currently dabbing my brush into the paint. So we want to first start with like a darker shade of metallic paint, and we just want to go over the whole model. You can see that I'm making stabbing motions, yes, but I'm also every now and then just like making swirly motions. I'm mixing up as I go because I don't want it to look very uniform. I want it to look like there are scratch marks and stuff like that. You can see I'm not being too thorough with it because the brown will end up looking like rust. So even if I don't completely cover it, it will still look realistic in that sense. So you don't have to worry about like the nooks and crannies that you can't really get yourself into. After I'm done with the first layer of metallic paints, I actually go over it once more with like a lighter shade of metallic metal. And yeah, just keep varying your brushes, making sure that you cover as much as you can, but also just don't worry too much about it. You're just trying to get this done as quick as you can. Okay, so here's where things started going a little bit wrong because I was just kind of slapping paint down. I originally tried to use orange and purple and that didn't look right, so I tried adding pink, and then I was like, maybe I need more yellow because it's not that bright, but it just kind of overwhelmed the whole thing, so I threw that away. So instead, I decided that since previously that was too much colors, I would try instead just using one bright color and having all the other colors I wind up using kind of complement it instead. So what I ended up going for was using black and pink and a light grey / white. Because the problem was it was just way too much, so instead I just started to tone it down, have it focus on one color so that it's just not too much for someone to fully understand. So what I learned was that when you're painting these kind of models, you might actually want to just wing it and then just paint and figure out what will look good. Because in theory, what I had in mind, purple and orange makes sense in a theoretical way, but when I put it down, it just wasn't clicking with me. So just keep trying, you know, there's no real harm in getting it wrong the first time round. This is all in good fun, you know? Remember, you don't have to be too neat on your first try. You can just kind of wing it and then come back later and fix up all of the mistakes that you made prior. When you're using a light color like pink, like I am, you might want to also come back to it a few times just so that it's opaque as possible, because you're using a lot of other dark colors with it, so you want the pink to like really stand out when you're doing it.
Next up, sponging. This is when you use a dry sponge dipped in paint and go over your model. I would say this is one of the more cost-effective ways to weather your miniatures, as all you need is any kind of sponge. This gives off the effect of chipping paint, where the paint might have been rusted or scratched off a material. With sponging, less is more. The sponge achieves spots and scraps that your brush simply can't, but you don't want to take too much attention off your brushwork. So with that, let's try sponging.
First, you just want to break off a small piece of your sponge and use your tweezers to pick them up. Then you just dab a little bit of paint on the end of it and just gently dab the edges of your piece. So in the case of objects like this, of course you just want to use brown so that you can kind of get the rust effect that happens on metallic objects. So you just kind of want to go around the edges. You don't want to do too much, and you should also vary your strength that you use to dab it in, because if you use too much strength then it just kind of looks off. So you really just want to use a lighter tone for the other objects that look like they've been painted, because it ends up looking like the paint's chipping off in addition to the rust. So with black I used lighter grey, and with pink I used a pastel pink. So it ends up looking like the paint's chipped off in addition to rust, because usually the paint chipping will come before the rust.
Thirdly, we have pigments. These were literally made for the purpose of weathering your miniatures. It's as straightforward as can be. So there are two ways to use the pigments. The first is pigment wash, where you just add water to the pigment. This help gives the effect of dirt settling into the cracks of your miniature. The other method is dry pigment. You simply dust the pigment on to give the illusion that the environment around your miniature is dusty. So let's get our hands on some pigments.
So you can see here, I'm just putting in some water. The ratio is 1:1, but you just kind of eyeball it and hope that you get it right. So like with sponging, you don't want to just overwhelm your model with the pigment. You want to pick selected spots in which it would make sense for the object to kind of grow pigment like this. You want to pick spots where water or dirt might clog up. So the top of the roof, for example, would probably be rained on a ton and it would get trapped in all these small parts here, like in between the crevices or just like resting on top of the metal pipes. As for the front, you have to kind of see where the rain, water and all that kind of thing would settle. So you would want to put it on like ledges and stuff like that. You just want to cover it in like a way that's reasonable. Inside the ledges, all these kind of things. Just places where it would make sense that water would pool after a rain. So you can see here I'm adding watermarks. This is just to give it more of an illusion that it's kind of runny and things just kind of drip onto one another. And I'm just doing it for all of these objects that look like they would rust easy because they're exposed to the elements. So I noticed that some of these pigments kind of get clumped together afterwards. So what you can do to give it a more gradient effect of it like washing out, you can actually just use water and just gently dab the outside of it, and you spread it a little bit more so that it doesn't look too clumped up or opaque. Next up we have dry pigment, and it's literally just dabbing it in here and just going ham on it. So I'm using dry pigment on the bottom because that's where it would be really dusty and like that's where the dust would collect around the model. So you don't want to put too much because if you do it you clog up the details and you'll just be making a really messy station for yourself. So just try to be careful with how much you apply at one go. It's better to apply little by little rather than just one giant blow and then like having a bunch of smoke puff out everywhere.
Lastly, we have washers. You might already be familiar with washers because they are easy and quick way to get depth onto your miniature. When using washers for weathering, you use them on things that should resemble oil and grime, like for example a tank leaking or spillage. It's pretty straightforward, but let's try it out.
So to demonstrate the washers, I actually use a different piece of Kill Team Terrain. Once again, you kind of want to just aim for places that oil and gunk would pool at. The nature of liquids like oil is that it runs, so you could try using your finger or brush to mimic streaks across areas that would be subjected to a lot of it. Try thinking of washers like pigment washers and aim for the same kind of areas that they would build up in. For example, metal bolts and in between grates. So you can see here, I don't really know what this object stores, but I can pretend it's something like oil that would just be running, so I would place streaks here. That kind of thing, you know, just be liberal and creative with where these oils might run. So let's talk real quick about decals because I did end up using them for this particular terrain. So as you can see here, I'm just cutting around the decal. You don't want to cut too close. You can just cut around the edges. After you're done, you take a small tray of water and you put in the decal. Simple enough, and then you just kind of let it soak for a little while. Make sure that you flip it onto the right side up. This can take some maneuvering, but you should get it. It's not that difficult. So you just kind of locate spots in the model where you want to apply a decal and you put in some mark setter. Then you slowly and very carefully remove the decal from its base and you apply it onto the model. So this kind of just sticks it on. Here you can see me using a cotton bud. This is to make sure that there's no water. And afterwards I use mark setter so that it gets rid of the film around it. And there you have it, some fully fleshed out Kill Team Terrain. I had a lot of fun working on this piece and I learned a lot of different techniques that I can use. It doesn't all make sense with this one piece, like how there's oil spillage but the environment is really dry. But I think in the end I created a pretty cool piece.
And there you have it, 4 different ways to weather objects. If you ask me personally which process I prefer, I would pick washers because I'm just more familiar with them and they're easy to use. But all of these methods serve different purposes for different materials, so use them according to what might suit you best. Thank you guys for watching all the way to the end. As usual, give us a like and subscribe if you like what you watch or you found it useful. If you want to support the channel even further, head on over to Patreon and become a Patreon supporter today. There you'll get a whole slew of painting content that we've been producing over the past year or so. So thank you guys once again, and I hope to see you in the next Beginner Explains video. Ciao!